Usually, reading Shakespeare is a unique experience for me. Whenever I'm reading one of his plays, I feel like I'm engaging with something that is on a quite different level from everything else. Even though I wouldn't say Shakespeare is my favorite writer or playwright or whatever that is, there is always that distinct feeling that there is something untouchably great about him. Maybe it's the language. I often find myself reading certain passages out loud or reading certain lines again and again just to enjoy the poetry. Or maybe it is the wealth of characters that he wrote about from all walks of life in all types of situations. It's really amazing. Or maybe it is the insights that he provides into what we call human nature. The portrayals of the whole of the emotional spectrum, from grief to joy, excitement, frustration, anger, jealousy. Or maybe I feel that greatness about Shakespeare simply because he is Shakespeare. But after all this elation comes this. I'm really sorry that my first review of a Shakespeare play on my channel is going to be this one. You see, I wanted to read one of Shakespeare's less celebrated plays, and I happen to have a copy of The Taming of the Shrew lying around. So I picked it up. Now granted, I did not expect the same experience I had with reading Macbeth or A Midsummer Night's Dream, but I thought it would be at least okay, or if it's really bad, at least it would have one or two redeeming qualities about it. But nope, this is terrible. Really, there is not a single thing that I enjoyed in this play. Even the edition that I happen to have did not contribute much to that experience. If anything, it made it even worse, but I'll rant about that in a moment. Now, from the title, The Taming of the Shrew, I expected a bit of misogyny, but as with other plays I read from Shakespeare, I expected something else besides the misogyny. Some complexities, some nuance, I don't know, something. But the misogyny here turned out to be horrific. And the fact that it's all played for laughs as a comedy made it even worse. It's really disturbing. After I finished it, I went online to see what other people thought of this play, and most people, most ordinary people at least like me, hated it. But there was a good number of articles written either by scholars, performers, or other Shakespeare enthusiasts that went to extreme length to prove that this play is not as terrible as it seems. They said things like, there is a hidden message in there about the emancipation of women, or if you analyze this play this way or that way, you would actually see that it is a parody of the marriage model that was traditional at the time, and other things that, to be frank, and to me at least, seemed a lot like nonsense. And this got me thinking that all of these attempts to defend the play, as it were, really said more about us and how we need to view Shakespeare more than say anything of value about the play itself. But I am getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about this in a moment. Let's first talk about the plot of the play and what I disliked about it in particular. Okay, so in Padua there is a wealthy man named Baptista, and he has two daughters, Katherine, the shrew, the cursed, and Bianca, the all-lovely and obedient. And Bianca, because she's so damn lovely and obedient, has many suitors. Two of them, Hortensio and Gremio, are somewhat wealthy men from Padua, and they have been courting her for a while. But there is another suitor that joins on the action. His name is Lucentio, and he comes from Pisa. He came to Padua because he wanted to study philosophy and improve his mind. But the moment he arrives, he lays eyes on Bianca, and he falls madly in love with her. The problem is that her father decided that Bianca cannot marry until her older sister, Katherine, the scary shrew, is married off first, and nobody wants to marry the shrew because she scolds people. So Hortensio and Lucentio disguise themselves as teachers to gain access to Bianca and court her secretly, and at the same time they and Gremio try to find a suitor for Katherine so that she can get married, and then Bianca can be released and be free to marry one of them. Here enters the magnificent hero of the play, Petruchio. Petruchio hears of Katherine's character, but he also hears of the large dowry that he would receive if she agrees to marry him. And since he has long decided that he's going to marry a wealthy wife, he decides that Katherine is the one. And what's more, his independent and strong character would not be cowed by the shrewish woman. So he starts to court her, and his courtship methods are somewhat unorthodox because they involve what can be seen as less than romantic gestures, such as humiliation, deprivation of sleep, starvation, and something very close to brainwashing. But you know, Katherine is a shrew, she speaks a bit louder than is expected, so it's all good fun. It is completely wholesome and funny that we should cheer as we watch Petruchio holding all the power over Katherine, deprive her of even the basics for survival in an attempt to tame her. There are some other shenanigans with Bianca and her suitors, and as with all Shakespeare's plays, there are a good number of servants and attendants who slap each other and make innuendos and puns, all in good fun. Now let's talk a little bit in detail about Katherine and Petruchio. When they first meet, they have a verbal exchange comprising mostly of insults and witty retorts, and at this stage I thought it was okay. I didn't agree that Katherine was a shrew, I couldn't see it, and I didn't approve of most of what was going on in the play, but, this is a play that was written a very long time ago, and back then if women spoke a bit louder than they should have, or if they did not obey orders, I guess they could be seen in negative light. Fine. And the lines themselves were a bit entertaining, and to see Katherine's independence and fiery nature was something interesting to witness. However, very, very soon things go downhill. You see that the power balance is completely skewed in favor of Petruchio, and the whole premise of them being two headstrong characters clashing doesn't really work because they are not on the same footing. So he tells her quite bluntly that he wants to marry her because he has agreed with her father already on the dowry that he would receive, and whether she agrees or not, he's going to marry her next Sunday. Actually, the words were, "Will you, nill you, I will marry you." She says that, "Come Sunday, I will hang you, I will kill you." But still, after this brief dialogue, when they are joined by all the others, Petruchio announces that they are going to marry on Sunday. And Katherine repeats that she's going to hang him on Sunday, and he says, don't pay attention to what she's saying, she's just saying this in public, but when we were speaking privately, she agreed to marry me. And everybody's okay with that, okay, fine, let's not believe the woman because, she's a shrew. And everything is set for the marriage on Sunday. And in the intervening period, Katherine somehow makes up her mind that she's going to marry the man without putting up any further fight. We don't see how that happened, we don't know why it happened, it doesn't sit well with her shrewish nature, but So Sunday comes, but Petruchio arrives to his wedding late, and he's wearing embarrassing clownish clothes and riding a limping horse, and he's doing all of that to show right from the beginning his dominance over Katherine. I can be as embarrassing as I want, I can humiliate you however I like on your wedding day right from the very beginning, and you can say nothing about it. After the wedding ceremonies, he decides to take her away from her own party, and she doesn't want to leave, but he takes her away by force, again further humiliating her and showing her who the man is. As I said before, his next methods at taming the shrew consist of depriving her of sleep on the first night and the second night of their marriage, and God knows for how many nights afterwards. He deprives her of food. There is this scene that is supposed to be funny where he throws a tantrum about how bad the food is, how ill prepared it is, and because he loves her so much, he wouldn't subject her to eat that terrible food. Of course, what he is trying to do is just starve her, deprive her of food, because when she is so hungry that she needs just sustenance, he can bend her to his will however he likes. And actually he was very blunt, and the passage that describes his feelings and his reasoning behind this is one of the most disturbing in all of the play. Other things he does involve contradicting her and everything. There is the scene where he ordered a cap and a gown for Katherine, and even though the cap and the gown were perfectly fine and Katherine liked them very much, he again throws another tantrum, saying how badly they were made. He shouts at the tailor, he says they're terrible, and he wouldn't subject his lovely Katherine to be wearing this. Again, what he's trying to do is to show her that in the end he's the one who's making the decisions, and if he doesn't want her to wear a certain gown or a certain cap, then she won't. Actually, he goes as far as saying that if I say it's 2 o'clock and you think it's 7 o'clock, you're not allowed to say so. You have to agree with me. And this is obviously brainwashing. He does it again with the moon and the sun. They're walking at noon, and he says, well, the moonlight is very nice. And Katherine dares contradicts him by saying, no, actually this is sunshine, not moonlight. And he throws a very bad tantrum and becomes very angry, and he wants to get back home and cancel whatever they were doing because she keeps contradicting him, nothing but contradiction from her. And with time, after so many incidents like these, Katherine in the end submits, she is tamed. When he says, this is not the sun, this is the moon, she agrees. And he exercises that at one moment when they meet an old gentleman walking in the street, and he says, oh, what a lovely woman. And she says, yeah, she's the prettiest woman I have ever seen. And then he says, what, are you blind? This is obviously a wrinkly old man. And she says, well, forgive me, my lord. My eyes must have deceived me, or something like that. The worst part of all of this is that we as readers or viewers of the play are supposed to be laughing at what Petruchio is doing. But actually, as you can see, it was quite disturbing, and it got worse as the play dragged on, and for the last 40 or 50 pages of this, I was really forcing myself to go through with it. At the very end of the play, Katherine has a speech in which she talks about the type of marriage and the harmony that now exists between Petruchio and herself, because she obeys him in everything and because she sees that she should be at his will, whatever he wants. And I guess that is one of the messages in the play, that if a wife is completely obedient and ready to believe and do whatever her husband commands, then the marriage would be a peaceful marriage of harmony. But again, if you think about how that peace and harmony came about, I mean, it's not in Catherine's nature to be obedient like Bianca. She was made obedient through humiliation and dehumanization. I mean, when you look at it in that light, the peace and harmony in the marriage really do sound questionable. Another point Katherine raises in her speech is that this is a kind of marriage of equality, not based on equality of power, but that the husband is the one who's going outside the house to work, to expose himself to danger, to cold, and is tiring all day long just to provide for the wife and to keep her secure and safe, while the wife is staying all day long at home, doing nothing, having everything ready for her. So in recompense for all the troubles that her husband is going through to provide for her, she can at least be obedient and comfort him and do whatever he pleases. I do admit that this is an improvement on the previous model of marriage that was prevalent perhaps in the medieval period, the one which said women have to be obedient to men simply because they are women. Women as creatures, they are inferior to men, and that is all. So this is an improvement. This is saying, no, women are not inferior to men. They don't have to be obedient because they are women, but because the roles they play are different. But again, I find all of this really irrelevant because everything that happened to get them to that point is objectionable. And what's more, Petruchio doesn't strike me as the man who would put himself in danger and expose himself to cold and all kinds of difficulties just to provide for his wife. I mean, we have to remember that he decided to marry Katherine and tame her in the first place because she's the one who's going to give him that large dowry. Now, what can be said of Katherine, the shrew herself? Actually, I found her to be a flat, shallow character. I'm not saying Katherine herself is shallow. I'm saying the characterization of Katherine felt flat and shallow to me. For one thing, her shrewishness basically is saying no to her father a couple of times, retorting to the insults of the suitors, and hitting her sister for no obvious reason. But is that really enough to justify her reputation as one of the most scoldish women in all of Padua? I really don't think so. Maybe we should just believe, as we are told, take it for granted that she is a very scoldish, shrewish woman. Or maybe she's not shrewish at all. Maybe she's a misunderstood and lonely woman. She doesn't obey her father in everything because why should she? I mean, the example that we're given of her disobedience is when her father says to Bianca, okay, Bianca, you go into the house, and she does. And he says, Katherine, you stay out. And she says, well, am I a child to be ordered when to go in and when to go out? No, I decide that for myself. That is the kind of disobedience that we see in the play. As for her treatment of the suitors, they were insulting her, and it's completely okay for her to retort back. But anyway, what is in the text itself isn't really enough to carry this interpretation any further. And after her first encounter with Petruchio, after their first brief dialogue, we rarely ever hear from her again. As I mentioned before, how she came to agree to marry Petruchio after swearing that she will hang him, we do not know. And after her marriage, she barely speaks at all, unless to express how sleepy or hungry she is, to beg for food, and whenever she does say something, she is immediately cut short and contradicted by her doting husband. With the exception of the few examples that I have mentioned, which are supposed to demonstrate what a mean woman Katherine is, there is not a single instance of shrewish behavior as far as I can remember. And in the end, when she is finally tamed, it was really very sad. What happens to her in the end is heartbreaking. Her final speech I found heartbreaking. Yet it was all done for comedy. And there is something really horrible about all of this. And this is what I was trying to say at the beginning of the video when I said I expected something else besides the complete misogyny and shallow characterization. I mean, take for example Shylock in A Merchant of Venice. He is given one of the most powerful speeches in the play, or perhaps in all of Shakespeare's plays. And however you decide to interpret this play, you cannot overlook that really powerful speech from Shylock. But here Katherine is not given anything like that. Even if we agree that she is a mean, scoldish woman, the fact that she is being treated in that very dehumanizing way, I mean, we should at least see its effect on her. We should hear what she is going through, how she is processing all of that, but we don't. Katherine is portrayed as a straw figure that you can treat with as much cruelty as you want, simply because she has that epithet of being a shrew. And the truth is that I felt that Shakespeare was really immature and very unfeeling towards Katherine in the way he drew up her character and drew up all of the events that take place in this play. Which brings me back to the question I raised earlier in this video. There is an astonishing number of articles and reviews on the internet which go to extreme length to prove that Katherine is not really tamed. They say she rather found herself within the social order. Now she can better operate from within rather than be an outsider exhibiting antisocial behavior that would get her nowhere. Or the articles that do admit that she is tamed, they say that she's not tamed in the common sense of the word. Rather, she re-emerged from her experience with Petruchio, liberated from her past self and ready to give herself to love and be loved. And while all of this is very cool, there are interesting exercises in literary gymnastics or critical gymnastics, but there is one small flaw. Petruchio's treatment of Katherine is downright abusive. There is no way to get around that. There is no ignoring it. And as for love, we have to remember that he did not marry her because he loved her. He married her because of the dowry that he was promised. And she does not love him, she was forced to marry him. So I don't see how love can really come into that equation. But anyway, what I was trying to say is that the extent that these articles go to prove all these kinds of things shows that we really cannot accept this play as it seems to us. Why? Just say it is a terrible play and move on. It's like we need Shakespeare to present us with a certain level of complexity and greatness, and when he falls short of that, we go crazy trying to fill in the gaps. As I said before, this I find really says more about us and how we need to view Shakespeare and how we do view Shakespeare, more than say anything of value about the play itself. And this actually made me re-examine my own frustration with this play. I mean, there are many other plays from the Elizabethan period, from the medieval period, and even after, from the Enlightenment, that endorse views very similar to the ones in The Taming of the Shrew, but for the most part they are forgotten. I know they are forgotten because I read no less than 2 or 3 of these plays, and at the moment I can recall none of their titles, but I'm sure I will remember The Taming of the Shrew for a long time to come. But with those other plays not written by Shakespeare, we accept that they have become outdated and irrelevant, and at best we treat them as windows into the values and the worldviews of their time. But not so with Shakespeare. We expect Shakespeare to remain great and to speak to us directly as if he is not a product of his own time and as if he was not a human being who developed in his career. I mean, the guy wrote, 37 plays? Of course he's not going to give us his best, and he's not going to be at his most profound in all of them. And this one is a very early play in his career as a writer or as a playwright. Just because it's Shakespeare, it doesn't automatically mean that it's going to be complex and nuanced. Just because it's Shakespeare, it doesn't mean that it must be ambiguous or there must be some hidden meanings that can only be unlocked by genius analysis. We have to accept that some of his plays can become completely worthless, as is evident. It's okay. It feels kind of weird to be so critical of Shakespeare. Well, I'm being critical of one of Shakespeare's plays, but still, it feels kind of strange to do this so openly and so publicly. But I guess this is all part of what I have been trying to say for the past 4 or 5 minutes. And anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. If you have read The Taming of the Shrew, please let me know what you think of this play and what you think of this review. If you liked it, I would be particularly interested in what it is that made you like this play. But if you haven't read The Taming of the Shrew, then I honestly suggest that you give it a miss. It takes me about a day to read any of Shakespeare's plays, and I guess you can find more fruitful ways to spend that time, like, say, rearranging your socks drawer. Alright, that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week, hopefully with a more pleasant discussion of Jane Austen's Emma. Cheers.